At this time, we'll continue the presentation from Harris County with Major Mike Lee, and then we will hear from our good friends from Lubbock. Major Lee.
All right. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm Mike Lee. I'm actually the chief deputy at the sheriff's office, but that's okay. I've been major, been captains, assistant chief. But first thing I want to know is how many folks in law enforcement, and not the prosecutors, we know you're law enforcement, but I mean with policing or sheriff's departments that are in the audience, with a show of hands. Because I know some of you attend every year, and I appreciate you being here, because a lot of this I'm going to try to address towards maybe things that you want to know or you're inquiring about. I'm going to talk about the first slide here is on the law enforcement perspective on basically the financial aspects of this, which is not my favorite slide, because whether it was our neuropsychiatric center, which is our crisis diversion center that Harris County opened up back in 1999, or whether it was the sobering center that we opened up back in 2007. Each time we were asked to put together a business case. And, from law enforcement's perspective, it truly wasn't about the business case. But I know your political leaders are going to want to hear that. But to me, it's truly, that's really a slippery slope, because whether you build those types of centers or this diversion center, this diversion center, and I say slippery slope because if your political leaders come back to you a few years later and with the auditors crunch the numbers and say, look, it doesn't really appear that, we've diverted 8,000 people to the Ammett Diversion Center, the Neuropsychiatric Center, we've diverted law enforcement diverted well over 100,000 people there instead of jail. And our sobering center is phenomenal. Gilbert, I see you in the audience, thanks to our folks from San Antonio that taught us how to do the sobering business. And we went from putting 20,000 people a year in jail for public intoxication to less than a few hundred a year in jail. But at the end of the day, did my jail costs go down? My jail costs have not gone down. I spend at Harris County, we spend over $300 million a year in our jail. But our jail, is overcrowded. We have approximately about 9,600 inmates in the Harris County Jail. I have 1,500 of those outsourced. I know Brandon Wood is somewhere here in the audience or in the next room, and he's on our tail all the time about our jail situation. And so we have 1,500 outsourced, either out in West Texas or in the state of Louisiana. And I have 900 murders in my jail. Our average length of stay is right at 200 days in our jail. So we're no longer really a jail, a county jail. We're a prison. So we really don't have room for these low-level offenders. And that's the case that you're trying to make. You're trying to make that, look, it's not always about the economics. It's about, truly, it's the morally right thing to do. These individuals, so, a lot of you that know me know I spent my first 27 years with the Houston Police Department and doing the law enforcement side, not really caring about what was going on. Not that I wasn't caring, it's just that you don't get the true picture of what's going on in that jail system. You are out there doing law enforcement and making those arrests. And when I came over with Sheriff Gonzalez and helped him run the sheriff's office, it was very frustrating to see that our jail was full, and I was still seeing these individuals it was apparent they had mental health issues. And they were coming in these very low-level charges. And then we look at our state wait list in our jail, like all of you do, and your state wait list is very long. And you had people in there for Class B trespass and low-level offenses sitting in there for months and months and sometimes a year. And those of you in law enforcement know that if you were arrested for a Class B trespass and you didn't have mental health issues, you would go in that jail and you'd probably be in and out in 12 hours or so after you bond out. But if you had mental health issues, you got caught up in the system because you're incompetent. So you sat in there for months waiting to be restored to competency so you could go to court on your Class B trespass. And it made absolutely no sense. So we knew there was this gap. We knew that when officers on the streets and deputies on the street were encountering people in crisis, say they were trespassing and we knew there were an obvious crisis, there was a place to take them. And that was the neuropsychiatric center. But for those, people that, live with mental illness, how many of you know they don't go around in crisis every day? They're not in crisis every day. Okay, so when officers encounter them, and trust me, officers encounter the same people in their area often. And so one day you'll see Joe and he's in crisis and he's trespassing, and that was an M.P.C trip. It was pretty simple. But the next time the store owner calls, and Joe, this is just a place he likes to hang out at, he's not in crisis. He's not a danger to himself that day. He's not a danger to anyone else. The grave neglect is truly not there to meet the criteria. So what did you do with him? You put him in jail because there's no other option. And that's where this option and this ideal came from. This has already been talked about by Dallas. I think we mentioned it too. I'll go through this very quick and save the time for Wayne to go into the true work that's being done. The key is whatever type of facility it is, like the ones I mentioned, either whether it's your crisis drop-off center, whether it's a sobering center, whether it's a diversion center. For law enforcement buy-in, first of all, you have to have buy-in from the top. You have to have a quick, streamlined process. I know Dallas says their goal was 15 minutes. I think we average around 10 minutes turnaround time for the officers and deputies that come into the center. They fill out one form, and that's it. And that is key, because every officer in this room that I saw raise their hand will tell you one thing, that if you're going to want me to buy into diversion and take someone that just committed a low-level offense to a different facility other than a jail, and it's going to take me longer to get them in that facility than in my jail, well, guess where they're going? They're going to go to the jail. So that's key, the turnaround time. And I can tell you we don't have that problem in Harris County because our joint processing center, every law enforcement agency, 84, directly books into our processing center, and that is about a 1 to 3 hour turnaround time. So our officers and deputies are really more than happy to take them to these other options when they're available. Educational videos, written procedures, it's key. Your officers, your deputies, they have to have very clear and concise guidance. Officers and deputies, I've always said, they'll do what you ask them to do if you just give them the resources and then give them clear guidance. They truly will. And the key about the resources or the policies, I'm a firm believer, they are not suggestive in nature. They're directive in nature. I've seen departments start these type of programs and they flounder, but then when I took a look, they'll call me and say, Mike, could you take a look at what's going on here? Well, they came up with this policy and they just told their officers, it's a suggestion. If you'd like to use this, this is an option for you. It can't be that way. It truly has to be directive in nature. Just real quickly, some of the concerns that have been brought up. What if a suspect refuses to go? It's already been mentioned. These are voluntary, but the sales pitch Denise talked about, she referenced, it's a really easy sales pitch. And I've never had anyone choose option B. I don't get that report from my deputies that, hey, you can either go over here to these really nice social workers, they got some really nice cookies and punch, and they're going to talk to you, and they're going to help you out with things, or I've got this not really a great place to go. It's loud, it's noisy, it's chaotic at our jail. Which one would you like to go to? Yeah, I think I'll go with option A. So that's usually not a problem. What happens if the diversion center doesn't accept the suspect? We've been fortunate. Wayne's folks, and I'm sure the facilities in the other jurisdictions are the same way. It's all about that staff approach. They really are receptive. They know they need to get that person out of the officer's hands, and every attempt is made not to turn the person away, to engage with them. And if the person was a danger, I can tell you, they're not going to the facility in the first place. Officers do use their discretion, and they know if it's a dangerous individual, that's not the appropriate place. If they have mental health issues and they're acting out, they go to the crisis drop-off center. If they're combative, we do get reports sometimes that they're fine. They're having a great time on the ride. They're having a good conversation. They get there and they might become a little combative with Wayne's staff. And usually it's just that agitation. And once again, it's all about that reception from the staff. They calm them down and it all works out. This has always been this is every group that comes to visit asks this question. And this is sometimes really coming from the naysayers, the chiefs or the sheriffs or the judges or the DAs that come, they always ask, well, just how many times are we going to divert this person for criminal trespass? And we're going to say, you know what, as many times as it takes. Because all of you in the business that know a lot more about, the mental health and social work business than I do as a law enforcement officer know it may not be the first time, it may not be the third time, and it may not be the 15th time that that person engages with those services, okay? And so I tell you, in the early days, I got a lot of pushback from my command staff when we were coming up with these diversion alternatives, and especially around the sobering center, and, where they would say, look, okay, we've taken this person there 20 times. At some point, they got to go to jail. And so my response would be, okay, chief or sheriff, here's my answer to that. We take them to jail 60 and 70 times and it doesn't work. It hasn't worked. So I'll tell you, I'll make you a deal. When it works, as soon as we run out of, I think at the time, our person that had been in the jail the most was like 88 times for low-level offense. And I was like, okay, so at 88 times, maybe then we'll come back and have this conversation. So, really, there should not be a limit on how many times the person goes. Restitution, we don't seek restitution. Most of the individuals we're talking about are homeless. What about if they have mental illness but not in crisis? Mental health crisis is not required for admission into the diversion center. Matter of fact, if they're in crisis, like I said once earlier, that is not the appropriate facility for them. We have a facility for that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Wayne.
Thank you, Chief. I'm going to try and go fairly quickly here. My friends from Lubbock are due up on the stage in just a couple of minutes. One of my favorite things about that conversation on the mental health piece is I know really skilled board certified psychiatrists in an office with all their history in front of them would have a hard time deciding if they committed that offense because of their mental illness or some other behavior. I would certainly not want to put law enforcement in that position to do it at midnight behind a Circle K, right? Like I don't think that's likely. This is a little bit of a map. It's one of my favorite slides, and it is kind of the 5-year evolution of our diversion center. We opened in 2018. As Denise mentioned, we've now diverted over 9,000 people since we opened on that date. This is our first year. We just finished. We operate on the state fiscal year. This is our first year that we exceeded 2,000 diversions in a year, so we're excited about that. In 2019, we expanded the charges. I appreciate the DA's leadership in that, law enforcement support. The first 6 months or so, it was all criminal trespass, and then we opened it up much broader. In 2020, we moved to a bigger facility. Denise is right. The first visit, she said, well, it needs to be bigger. It's hard to conceptualize bigger when you've never done it, right? When you haven't had anybody there. Today, we got the county and the city to each grant us $5 million, and we bought a larger facility that has 108 beds with about 7 different programs that are all at the intersection of homelessness, criminal justice involvement, and serious mental illness. And so there's lots of cool stuff that's there. Next month, we break ground on 24 apartment units that are going to be on that same campus. And so really you can kind of run the full continuum from community intervention to housing. Post-charge diversion we started off just completely pre-charged. The DA introduced post-charge diversion. There's a fair amount of that work that occurs. We expanded it so that we have non-law enforcement response teams that get dispatched out of the 911 process that we have. They have access to the diversion beds, so that we refer to those as MCOT rapid response in our community, so they can take people to our diversion center. In May of this year, we opened our youth diversion center. We have a 13-bed youth diversion center. Almost all of those youth are getting diverted as a result of assault of a family member charge. So these are family conflicts that escalated, that law enforcement got involved, and no one really feels like this kid needs to be put in detention as a result of that family conflict. And so we opened a new youth diversion center. And then the mental health diversion prosecutor, a little bit on site, also available by Zoom most of the time. That's been a pretty big boom to that as well. Who we serve, this will I'm sure is in the packet and available. huge portion of our population are also experiencing homelessness and are unhoused. You can see the gender and ethnicity breakdown that are there. For every dollar we spend on diversion, we have avoided $5.54 in criminal justice costs. There's a 50% reduction in bookings if you look at the same group. If you create a sample that is normed and adjusted to be able to fit, you're 1.3 times less likely to be booked into jail on a new charge if you've been diverted as opposed to those that weren't. Friends asked, well, what about the people who get arrested a lot? I didn't know what a lot meant, so I made up a number. We said a lot was 5 times. And if you've been arrested 5 times, I think we all thought that the likelihood of you not having future arrests would decrease. Instead, it increased. 3.1 times less likely to be booked into jail on a new charge if you've been arrested a lot in our community and get diverted. We also have pretty significant mental health impacts. We've done multiple evaluations now that people who get diverted compared to those who don't have fewer psychiatric emergency events and have fewer hospitalizations as well. This is my favorite slide because it gets at the heart of what we're trying to do. This is just trespassing charges, so it doesn't include all the others. Prior to that red line, so on the left of that red line, are the number of people that got booked into jail on a trespassing charge who had a treatment history with the Harris Center. Okay, so that means they've been engaged in our system at some point, maybe not recent, might have been historical, but had some sense of that. The red line is when the diversion center happened, so you can see that the people we serve, roughly 300 to 500 people a month were getting arrested for trespassing. And that number is now down in the 50s, sometimes sneaks up around 100. But it suggests to my law enforcement partners and criminal justice system partners that these are the people we want diverted. These are the people that are part of our system and the people that we need to keep out of the criminal justice system. With that, I would love to let our friends from Lubbock come up and talk about their diversion center.
And for our last group of presenters, so we'll go up to the panhandle, and I would like to introduce to you some more warriors in this area that have dedicated a lot of personal time and efforts to enhancing the plight of the mentally ill that come into our system. So I would like to introduce. I have Beth Lawson, the CEO of StarCare Specialty Health System, Professor Brian Shannon, who we heard from earlier from Texas Tech University at School of Law, and is it Marle or Marle? Marle Antu, who is the Chief of Behavioral Operations for StarCare, and she's really got a whole bunch of letters after her name, so and a very accomplished individual. So I believe, Beth, you're going to kick it off. The floor is yours. You're welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. Now, is this the clicker?
The green
This
arrow, the triangle thing. Yeah.
All right. Now we've got it. Well, good morning. How many of you are here hoping to receive a roadmap to diversion centers? It is your lucky day. So we've been introduced. I'm so excited to be up here with the judge. He's one of my favorite Marines. Ooh, ooh, hoorah. So are you ready? Get ready. Close your eyes because your next slide is your roadmap. There you go. There you go. You know, Marle, you should have really sat over here because I tend to be the cheese in the sandwich that is the professor and our clinicians here. But let me just tell you, this is really not too far off. Our diversion center process and progress, I really liked our friends from Houston that talked about the evolutionary nature. For us, it really started in 1990. See if you think this might sound familiar. We had a county judge and a sheriff who were a little bit mad about how long it was taking to get people into Big Spring State Hospital. And then we also had a hospital administrator at that point in time. It was called Lubbock General. It is now University Medical System. And people would go to the ER and wait for hours and hours of medical clearance, and then they would have to be transported if there was a bed. So fast forward to a legislative session in which there was some money that was available in Texas, particularly for a expansion of prison beds. And so Senator Monfort was very involved in the Senate Finance arena and said, hey, you know what? I kind of see an intersection here between we might be able to get something in Lubbock that would help our law enforcement and help our emergency room, and then kind of put mental health services in where they need to be. And so fast forward into a conversation with our executive director, Mr. Gene Menifee at the time. And okay, so here's what I want to tell you about our ride. Sometimes it's smooth. You know, this is the beginning of the ride. Everybody's fine. We're a little bit honeymooning, where everybody's happy and excited. Kind of fast forward. Sometimes it's smooth sailing for you, and it's really scary for me. And, you know, sometimes it's smooth sailing for me, and, you know, it sucks to be you. Sometimes it's a super mixed bag, because then you got the one person over here taking a selfie, and then you got another person that's screaming her head off. One person's passed out in the back, and the other one's just like, how did I even get here? And what I really like is the one where your partner passes out and you're like laughing at her and laughing at yourself, going, gosh, that could be me. It was me yesterday, and it might be me again tomorrow, but here we are. And so for us, you know, thankfully, we're all still on the ride. And this is a ride. The point here is that it is not an event. It is not a building you build and then you have a grand opening. You have, you know, the groundbreaking, you know, the gold hard hats and the shovel. And then you have the press release, and then you have the groundbreaking. After the groundbreaking, you have a ribbon cutting, and then you start delivering services, and then it's all over. Yeah, it's not that. It's exactly what Wayne and his compadres at Houston talked about with an evolutionary process. And so we are going to describe our evolutionary process, but I wanted you to kind of know this conversation's all about relationships. It's all about understanding the needs of your local community, and it's all about having the vision for the future and foresight to be able to think through what your community is going to need, not just today or actually yesterday in our case, but in addition to that, what you might need going forward even 25 years from now. So Professor Shannon's going to come and talk about literally how we got to the point of thinking through having a building for some diversion services, and I'll come back and talk about really where diversion started in 1990 and where we are today.
And I think I'll just do it from here. And at this point, I'm not wearing my professor hat, but I've had the good fortune to be an appointee on the board for StarCare for a number of years. And so coming at it from both a family member of a person with serious mental illness, as well as somebody interested in these issues broadly, and having had the great opportunity to serve with professionals in this area. And in terms of, and I might need the clicker, are you clicked? Excellent. In terms of the coalition that was built, so having been on the board a number of years, when Beth was talking about the beginning of the journey, we had the good fortune of Senator Monfort securing funds for a 30-bed inpatient facility, Sunrise Canyon there in Lubbock, that allowed for many of our adults with serious mental illness who needed hospitalization. They could stay in the community. We didn't have to have them transported to Big Spring. In more recent years, we had the opportunity for a lot of the various players in the community to come together. Being a prof at Texas Tech, I saw that we had a member of our Board of Regents from the Houston area get appointed, who had a keen interest in mental health policy and mental health issues. That helped draw the attention of the leadership at the university. When one of the big bosses, a regent, says this needs to be a priority, that had influence. And so the university then working under the system, created the Texas Tech Mental Health Institute that at one point was located at a system level and is now thriving and housed at our Health Sciences Center. And so Texas Tech had a keen interest. StarCare, obviously a player, the city, the county, our two major hospitals in the community, as well as the Community Foundation of Lubbock, came together and said, well, we're doing really good things over here and we're doing good things over there and this group's doing this, but there wasn't a lot of cohesion. And so these various parties partnered together and hired the Meadows Institute to come and do a needs assessment. And that needs assessment identified that what we thought, we're doing a lot of good things individually, but they're not exactly silos, but there wasn't a lot of coming together to meet some of the needs of people in our community. And so building on that report, one of the things that was identified was the need for developing something like we've heard our friends in Dallas and Houston talk about, a crisis drop-off center. So that then led to, Beth, pick it back up, building on that recommendation, ARPA money came around.
Yeah. This is really, when I talked about earlier, this is a presentation about relationships. And it was that Senator Monfort and Mr. Gene Menifee and our sheriff and our county judge at the time knew enough to know, gosh, our community can do better by its citizens. And that has just really evolved over time. And that's really how we got Sunrise Canyon Hospital. If you've heard me speak one time, you've probably heard me talk about Sunrise Canyon 1,000 times, because it really is a model of care out in West Texas. It's very different than any other the local mental health authorities has the benefit of, and that is that we have our community-based, community LMHA-operated hospital. And so diversion really started with that, in that we were diverting law enforcement from having to be on the road for a long time, diverting people who needed inpatient hospitalization from jail because they couldn't get to Big Spring, or diverting from emergency rooms. And that original contract that was awarded from the state to StarCare was actually made available to us because the city of Lubbock was a partner, the Lubbock County was a partner. This has been a long, at this point I would say generationally relationships for improving services in our community. And so when Professor Shannon talks about the mental health needs assessment, a couple of the things that came out of there were, there's always a difference between what you know or you think you know and what you know you know. And having the third-party objective institute come out to look at our system and kind of identify and agree or disagree or make recommendations was really important to us. One of the things they said about Lubbock is that we were small enough to get work done and to have decision makers in the room that could actually make decisions on the fly and not have to go back and ask somebody. But yet we were large enough to have access to very innovative mental health treatment, research, innovative law enforcement techniques, and a lot of real forward-thinking professionals. And so the diversion center idea is really an evolution of services that have, and I hate to use it again, evolved since the early 90s, and that is we were able to have Sunrise Canyon inpatient unit open, and then we were with that, partnering at the time, it was called the Texas Department of MHMR. We had general revenue funds that came to us that actually supported not only the inpatient portion of that treatment, but also the full continuum of care, understanding that crisis and the before MCOT was even a thing, that mobile crisis and front door eligibility and access to inpatient services was a key component to hospitalization. And so we call that a crisis center today. Well, what it was for us in the 90s was a room the size of a broom closet where some really talented, licensed folks took phone calls and assessed people to see if they were eligible for inpatient services, appropriate for inpatient services, or if they could go home with a safety plan or whatever. And so there begins diversion. With the Meadows mental health needs assessment that came to our community, that was really spearheaded by Texas Tech System, pulling together as a convener. I call it a convener of stature in our community. When Texas Tech, when a regent and the chancellor and the president of the Health Science Center say, "Hey, would you like to come to a meeting to talk about mental health?" And I'm like, so there. And then you have the two health systems, and you have the city and the county, and then you have a very highly esteemed community foundation that is willing to facilitate conversations of all these partners. You're really about to achieve something. And with the needs assessment, it became very clear to us that there needed to be coordination of care and collaboration, because as Professor Shannon said, lots of good things happening, and what we wanted to do is ensure that we were not leaving a gap between what our two health systems were doing, our medical health systems were doing, and then what we were doing as a specialty health system, and then what the city and county were doing, that we could fill some of those gaps to have a much broader and more robust system of care. And so what we agreed to, this is where Marle and I were talking about this last night. It's clear, like, when the opportunity, a chance favors a prepared mind, right? Well, we already knew that we had a lot of opportunity to expand our services, because we moved from a broom closet to then like a full-size closet, and then now into like a little bit of an office. And so we were like, gosh, our diversion services have just grown, and we are in a place where we really need a place, not just a room. I failed to mention a minute ago the delivery system reform incentive program. Some of you may know that as the 1115 transformation waiver. That was an opportunity that came to Texas about 12 years ago that really helped us have some strategic leaps in our service delivery system, in that we were able to add a 23-hour observation unit to our diversion array. And in addition to that, we were able to add after hours 24-hour crisis services to our crisis team. Before, it was a Monday through Friday 8 to 5. I know in your jurisdiction that's probably the only time crises happen, is Monday through Friday 8 to 5, so you wouldn't be interested at all in what I have to say. But we finally found some money to say, oh my gosh, we can have 24/7 access, walk-in access to our diversion area at Sunrise Canyon Hospital, where we have a awake staff person who can receive you and then to do a crisis assessment immediately. And that was literally life-changing. When you go from being asleep in the middle of the night and having a phone ring, well, you remember the phone at that point in time, and then having the phone ring and have to kind of jar yourself awake, and then have to drive all the way out to Cochran County or whatever to do an assessment. It is life-changing for everybody, primarily patients and families, to be able to say, I can come to your facility at any point in time. And so we were able to do that. And so while the state kind of stepped in early, the city and the county, and we had a lot of support from our hospital district in opening Sunrise Canyon, then having the ability to bring the 1115 transformation waiver and have some incentive funds available to the public provider of local mental health services in our area, statewide, as a matter of fact, kind of evolve those crisis services and get them bigger and bigger. Well, fast forward to COVID, it's kind of, I don't know, the shiniest double-edged sword maybe I've ever seen in existence. We learned how to telework, and the first time I had a Teams call, I was like having a meltdown, because it's like, I don't know what 3 dots, where do I click, kind of thing. And now I'm like, well, why do we have to meet? Let's just Teams, And so the evolution of even the technology has been really important to us. And so the American Rescue Plan Act was something that came as an opportunity to support people and entities who provided publicly funded mental health services. And it was all kinds of services. And it came both to state, city, county, from the federal government. And we have been the beneficiary of some state funding. We've also been very blessed with an opportunity to go before a joint session of our city council and county commissioners, because they both, county and city, received ARPA funding to support services and infrastructure in our community, both in our city and our county. And as the group came together, the West Texas Mental Health Collaborative, it became really clear that there was support by that group to petition the city and the county to designate some of their ARPA funding for a building for the diversion services that were currently being provided by StarCare, with the notion that we would be able to move the services that were in existence today and expand opportunities to partner with our community partners, not just in the West Texas community or mental health collaborative, but in addition, school districts and other private providers or public providers or religious providers, to be able to have community space where people can come and deliver care. We talked a lot about identity, refining it's when you lose your ID card and you can't get an ID card because you don't have any of your paperwork. And so it's like helping people regain documentation of their identity, having people be able from the health department come and do STD screenings, or have the ability to do COVID vaccines, or have the ability to do TB testing, and then all other kinds of mental health and public health kind of opportunities to have in that building. And so we went before the joint session, and we were very fortunate in that it was very well received by all members of the city and the county, and we were awarded a contract for $3.5 million from the city and $3.5 million from the county to build a building for our diversion services. As part of the agreement in that request, we asked for and agreed to each of the West Texas Mental Health Collaborative founding parties to sit on a steering committee to talk through and provide advice and insight and accountability for the growth of what we were going to do in the diversion center itself. We did a lot of the due diligence site visits. Yes, we've been on planes, trains, no, not trains, automobiles. We've been to Miami. We loved our visit to Houston. This was prior to our steering committee group, but we also went to Houston and saw their full array when the Emmett Center was at their original location. We went to Tarrant County. We went to, did I skip one? Yes, there's Miami. We had to go to Miami because that's the OG of it all, right? If you don't know the story of Judge Laffman, please go Google him. He's awesome. Bluebonnet Trails, our friends from Bluebonnet Trails are always role models for us. And then we were able to then have context. You know, we talked about earlier that folks call it the deflection center, the diversion center, the crisis center. What does that even mean? It means whatever you want it to mean in your community. We had the vision, but people in our steering committee needed context. They didn't have a clue about like what diversion would be, right? And so what would diversion look like here? And is there a cookie cutter, or is there a roadmap? So we went to all those sites and did some due diligence site visits, and then we came back and started working with our architects and engineers to be able to vision what the diversion center would be. If you're all right with this, I'm gonna just kind of speed through. Is that okay? Because I have a lot of words, apparently. We also were working on expanding the inpatient capacity. We spent millions of dollars sending people outside of Lubbock County and the city of Lubbock to private hospitals in our network of providers. We have 5 hospitals on our network because we are we don't have a waiting list. We have taken the perspective that at Sunrise Canyon, if we're full, we find a place for you. And so we don't put people on a waiting list in need for psychiatric services. That's just how we roll in Lubbock, and that it's a very expensive proposition, and it's not available to every region, but that's what we've taken on for ourselves. And so we've spent millions of dollars sending people outside of our community for inpatient care when we're full. Been talking a lot with our legislative delegation, and I have to really stop a moment and say our legislative delegation, led by our most senior member with Senator Charles Perry, they get it. They completely understand the intersection of when good public policy actually results in good care for citizens, and that is Sunrise Canyon. So we were at the same time asking for funding to grow Sunrise Canyon so we could stop sending people outside of our area. And so what you see here, so on the bottom right-hand side is a little square with you can see a porte-cochere. Right now, that is the 10,000 square foot diversion center that we're currently in the process of finalizing the architectural plans. And then the big building you see is an expansion to Sunrise Canyon Hospital. And so we have agreement by our steering committee that it only makes sense that our diversion center would be connected to our extended observation unit and then also connected to our expanded hospital. That way nobody has to go outside if they need a higher level of care. So we'll kind of fast forward through this. We have our hospital, and then we take the perspective of it being a continuum of care that starts with a crisis assessment and may end with inpatient admission, but it also might end with going home with a safety plan and a referral to an outpatient community provider. You can look online at kind of where we are now. The purple part is the diversion center and the extended and the shared area with our partners where we have community space and the community entrance. The green is the care section, the clinical section of our extended observation unit, with the red section, our dedicated law enforcement and crisis assessment area. Our timeline, we are on track to open in April of 2025. We're hoofing it. We're really wanting to do that, and that's the diversion center section. I mentioned to you that it's really important to us that we think about the future today. That way, 25 years from now, somebody who's standing up here can talk about, oh my gosh, they had so much foresight with knowing that we are going to have population growth in Lubbock. The difference between 1990 and 2023 is substantial. When I became CEFO at our community center in 2003, and our budget was about $23 million. This year, going into 2024, we're going to top 57 million. And so you can see that's more than doubled in that very short period of time. And so we have these two red areas. We have a plan for if there becomes money available to double the size of the diversion center, to have you heard our partner yesterday talk about the clubhouse model, the outreach and recovery center. We would really like to co-locate a day program with our diversion center, and that's what you see on the right-hand side of the slide. And then, yes, I'm not an architect, and no, I'm not a graphic designer either, but that square with the extra kind of Y wing, that was my attempt at copy paste, and I put another wing in on the hospital. But we have worked with our architects in such a way that we can, not me, because I'll be in Tahiti or dead, and that we will be able to expand our hospital without having to have another site.
Hey, Beth, could I just insert one other comment too about the communities coming together throughout all of this? We also had the good fortune that our board chair, who's here, Judge Drew Farmer, was throughout most of this period till recent retirement, a sitting judge with a criminal court docket in a court at law. So she saw many of the people you heard Harris County talk about come before the courts again and again and again, but also recognizing the services that StarCare provides. And that leadership, I think, really helped us in visioning where we went and working with our various partners.
That's exactly right, Brian. And I'll close by saying that Marle is our technical expert in all things clinical, all things flow for services, and she will be available. I'm sorry I took your time. She will be available if you have any questions specific to like how does it work, kind of, and what is the relationship with law enforcement. And then I'll be available for if you want to talk about like what kind of funding for services, how does that work? You know, when DISRIP went away, we were rubbing nickels together trying to get grants to keep that going, and we were able to do it, right? And so for us, it's really, I want to end with another emphasis on it is all about relationships. None of this would have been possible had it not been for the relationships that our senator, our CEO, our county judge, and our sheriff at the time pulled together in the early 90s and said, you know, we have a vision for this. And then this has been a sequence of handing the baton to the next person and handing the baton to the next person and handing the baton to the next person. And what you see really in our vision for the growth is handing the baton to the next generation and having capacity for our citizens that are not even born yet. But this for us, building and the kind of the manifestation of what a diversion center is, just beyond a bunch of services in a broom closet, would not have been possible had we not had a convener in our community that believed it to be available and possible in Texas Tech and the Health Science Center, and then having those community partners that, I mean, they had juice. I mean, you got the city, the county, the two major hospital districts, the specialty care system, and coming together and say, we do good, but we want to do better. And so without our partners, this would not have been possible. And so my advice to you is figure out who your partners are, lock arms, and get on the roller coaster and ride it to the end.